the addition of legendary Pelagius in Rise of Kingdoms, the developers revealed one important thing, and that is the fact that the next commander release cycle for Mightiest Governor and Wheel of Fortune is most likely going to be Cavalry, more specifically the 12th generation of Cavalry commanders in Rise of Kingdoms. So in today's video we're going to be speculating on those commanders. I'm going to be doing what I always do, and I'm going to try to predict what the upcoming legendary Cav commanders are going to be. How good will they be in the open field? And we'll see if I'm actually close. My track record is probably like 50-50 at this point. Sometimes I nail it and other times I'm way off, but I like doing this series on the channel because it gives me an opportunity to share with you guys kind of what I'm thinking about the future of the open field meta, how I am planning for it and how I'm preparing for it. And I also think a lot of you guys are already talking about what the next generation Cavalry can be. In fact, I've already heard people talk about leaks for these commanders, which by the way, as far as I know, are completely fake. Okay, I'm just going to say that right at the beginning here. Leaks for Rise of Kingdoms commanders haven't been accurate in many years at this point, ever since I think they updated the Unity engine for the game. But anyway, will the next legendary Cavalry commanders in Rise of Kingdoms bring them back up to the de facto best troop type in Rise of Kingdoms? That's what we're going to talk about today. But before we jump in, of course, what's going on, guys? Cheers. Now, as you guys know, I'm a partner creator with Rise of Kingdoms, so if you want more Rise of Kingdoms content, drop a like on this video and subscribe down below because we are so close to 100,000 subscribers. But anyway, let's just jump right in here, okay? And in order to understand sort of the future of the legendary Cavalry release cycle, we have to understand what we've gotten recently. Okay, now the reason that I said that the introduction of legendary Pelagius forced the developers to kind of confirm that the next release cycle is Cavalry is because in the video where they announced the update bringing Pelagius to the game, they said, hey, don't worry, this is not part of the Cavalry release cycle. Okay, so they're kind of getting ahead of the conclusions that the community might jump to. Okay, on top of that, if we jump over to my spreadsheet, this is the one where I've been keeping track of the commander releases for many years now, and this goes all the way back to just the original Julius Caesar and Frederick. Okay, all the way back in 2018, the launch of Rise of Kingdoms. I've been playing since then, but as you guys know, if you've been watching the channel for a while, then there is a set sort of order with which these commanders land in Rise of Kingdoms, and typically after we get leadership and engineering commanders, we usually get cavalry followed by infantry. That is often the case. Sometimes we get like a KVK commander in the middle, or sometimes we'll get a gathering commander or a KVK1 commander in the case of, you know, Pelagius or legendary Pelagius. But specifically regarding the Wheel of Fortune and Mightiest Governor, this pattern has held true for years and years and years, and so we know that cavalry are definitely next. The real question is, okay, so we're probably going to get a field commander, right? I mean, every release cycle we get a versatility commander, and those commanders work in the open field almost exclusively. Sometimes they have like rally or garrison merits, but typically they're only used for the field these days. Back in the day it was different. And then on top of that, we usually get either a rally or a garrison commander alongside of them. Okay, and if we look at the release history for the last couple of years, you will see a pretty similar trend. And again, I've talked about this on the channel before, but oftentimes they will alternate between releasing rally and garrison commanders, right? So in the case of, let's use archers because these were the most recent ones to follow this trend, we got Hayam Waruk, right? And this is a garrison commander. And then the previous archer release, we got Shapur, which is a rally commander. And then before that, we got Choi Young, which was a garrison commander. And before that, we got Ashurbanipal, which is a rally commander. Before that, Dido was a garrison commander. And so you can see the trend, right? And that works for infantry, and that also works for cavalry. And so if we look at cavalry, what have we been getting lately? Well, Eleanor was garrison, then we got Subutai, who was rally, then we got David, who was garrison. So the next cavalry release should be a rally commander. Okay, so let's go ahead and fill this in. We know that the next cavalry release should be a rally and field commander. That much is basically guaranteed. Now the developers could do whatever they want, right? I want to make that very clear here. Just because I'm a partner creator doesn't mean that I have insight here. Okay, I don't actually know. I'm not leaking anything. I'm just saying these are the trends that we see all the time. The developers, if they feel like the garrison meta is completely broken still and they need to add another cav garrison, they could totally do that, right? But I think it's pretty clear what's coming next. It's probably a rally commander, 99.9% chance. Okay, so with that being said, the rally garrison commanders are almost always the MGE commander, and then the field commander is almost always the wheel commander. Okay, and when I say almost always, it's literally literally almost always the case. The only sort of rule breaker here is actually Vercingetorix, who is a field commander that finds himself in the Mightiest Governor event, but that's because Elizabeth is also a field commander, and so that's kind of how they did it. I'm kind of disappointed about that, to be honest with you, but I think a big takeaway that you're going to get from this video is that you should be very careful investing in Vercingetorix because of what is probably coming down the pipeline for cavalry, right? I think a lot of people are looking at Vercingetorix as a commander that will pair really well with King Arthur, right? He'll be great behind King Arthur, and I think that's probably going to be true, but as you'll see later in the video, when I tell you when I think these cavalry commanders are going to come, he might only be in that meta slot for cavalry for a short period of time, unless you're running 3 cavalry armies. That's a totally different topic for another video, but most people are not doing that. Okay, so before you invest in Vercingetorix, finish watching this video. Okay, so as I said, I think it's pretty slam dunk that we're getting a rally MGE commander and a field Wheel of Fortune commander. Then the question is, okay, what's their blue talent tree going to be, right? And this is the one that varies quite a bit, and it's going to be kind of hard to predict this, right? Now, I think the most likely outcome is combo, right? Combo is what we've been seeing a lot for cavalry in the recent releases, to sort of flesh out their lineup with as many combo commanders as possible, and then later down the line maybe they'll start switching it up once again. That being said, however, it's not guaranteed to be combo, right? Because if we take a look at infantry, their most recent release, we see Ivar the Boneless is actually a smite commander that does not have the smite talent tree. Okay, and this matters a lot actually, because this is the first time that Rise of Kingdoms has introduced a smite damage commander without the smite tree since the smite tree came into the game, right? I know you're thinking about Gorgo and Liu Che. I understand that those commanders were smite damage, that the talent tree didn't even exist back then. Okay, so those don't count. And also I guess Ragnar Prime kind of doesn't count either, because that's a special KVK commander and he has to work with multiple troop types, so of course he's skill damage. My point is, I think you understand what I'm saying here. With the regular Mightiest Governor and Wheel releases, Ivar was the first time that they broke that trend of smite damage commanders get the smite tree. Okay, so now sort of Pandora's box is open. They can look at combo as well and say, okay, are there enough combo commanders for the rally garrison meta, right? And they might think yes, they might think no. I'm not really sure how they feel about that, but that being said, I think if either of these commanders were going to deviate from the combo path, it would be most likely the conquering commander, just like with Ivar the Boneless, right? So this could also be a defense talent tree. That could totally be the case, more of a tanking rally for cavalry. Now that's not usually how they function. That's not usually what you do with cavalry, right? Usually the tanking rallies are the infantry rallies, which is why you see the defense tree there. They also could go the Attila route and give them the attack tree, right? I mean, that's worked in the past with Attila. Now it's mainly because it's Attila, right? So Attila is a totally different beast all on his own. Okay, and they also have things like the support tree, the skill tree, the mobility tree. I don't think those are likely for the conquering commander, but it's a non-zero chance. I think we usually see the support tree finds itself on garrison commanders most often, or open field commanders, right? Those are the two that you typically see the support tree on. So that's that. But yeah, that's kind of my prediction for the rally commander. I think they are likely to be a combo damage commander, either with the combo tree, defense tree, or attack tree. I think attack tree is actually probably a little bit more likely than a defense tree, but that's just kind of a vibe check based on how cavalry work in rally garrison meta. More likely than not, though, they will probably find themselves either behind Attila or they'll find themselves behind Subutai, right? Subutai is the most recent cavalry rally commander, and they have the combo tree, right? So it really just comes down to, you know, how this commander is actually going to work. But those are probably the best pairs for this commander that we can almost immediately predict without much thought at all, honestly. For the field commander, I do think they will probably continue to focus on the combo tree. Like I said, referring back to the most recent releases for infantry and archers, they did stick pretty close to what the meta expects. So for archers, they expect the skill damage tree, and for infantry, they expect the smite tree for the field commander. So I think the open field cavalry commander is still most likely going to be combo. There is a small chance that it could deviate from that. Maybe they see the current cav lineup and they say, okay, there's actually already a bunch of really good cavalry commanders that could be primary commanders, and they could give the upcoming cav commander the mobility tree or the attack tree or the support tree or something like that. I don't think the support tree would be end of the world, but I think if it's anything other than combo, they'll probably find themselves as secondary, right? Because we already have such great primary commander contenders for the cav lineup, right? So we've got Gangnam Chan, who's great as either primary or secondary, but primarily people like him to be more tanky as the primary. Of course, Achilles can be primary, no problem at all. overall, even with Gangnam-chan. And then King Arthur, if he's going to be a combo damage commander, he actually has to be the primary. So in that case, it almost doesn't matter what the blue tree is for this upcoming cavalry commander, because the community at large is probably going to look to pair that commander with King Arthur, and in which case King Arthur is going to be the primary regardless, right? So they could do something a little bit unexpected with the blue talent tree here for this upcoming open field cavalry commander, but we will have to wait and see, right? So again, I think it's probably going to be combo, but if they wanted to, they could kind of do anything here just to play around and see what happens, and it won't really affect their meta usage at all. But I would like to see them be combo just for myself personally. Okay, so now that we kind of know the talent trees for the upcoming cavalry commanders and what I sort of expect them to be, then the question is, when are they going to get here, right? People really want to know when the next cavalry are coming, and so I'll just reveal my best guess. Okay, now again, longtime viewers of the channel will know that the average release cycle between Mightiest Governor and Wheel of Fortune commanders is 70 days. Okay, that is 10 weeks in between releases of new legendary commanders, and I think that there's no reason to expect this to change, right? I mentioned in a recent video that we actually had to wait quite a while for Alp Arslan and Hayam Waruk. There's a couple of reasons for that, primarily because they introduced Wedge 2, and then there was a bunch of community backlash for that, and so they had to rework Wedge 2, and so that probably delayed the release of Alp Arslan and Hayam Waruk because they had to go back in and retest everything. That's my guess, right? And so these came a little bit later, and then in order to kind of compensate for that, again, my suspicion is that they sped up the release of Vercingetorix and Elizabeth to kind of get the community back on track to an average of 70 days between release windows, right? Also, I think they know that the meta window for these commanders is not going to be that long anyway, and so it would make sense to just get them into the game as soon as possible, so the people that do actually get Vercingetorix can maybe get a full KV cat out of him, maybe two if you really want to, right? So again, those are my best guesses, but after this release, we should kind of be back on track to the 70-day average, in which case that would land the new cavalry commanders right in the first week of September of this year. That's 70 days from the release of Elizabeth, just to be clear. Okay, that being said, you know, if we did a 56-day release window, which is a sort of faster release cycle, then that would land these commanders at the end of August. Okay, now again, this is possible, but I think having back-to-back quick releases is unlikely. And on top of that, we still have yet to hear about a special KVK story, and that usually comes with a commander. At least the last two of them did, two of them or three of them, either way. So we're gonna have more commanders landing in the game soon, and so I don't think that they would want to mess up the balance even more. So that's my sort of guess there. Now, I think even more likely than the 56-day window is the 84-day window, and I know cavalry players are not going to want to hear that, okay, but the 84-day window actually lands us at the end of, or I should say middle to end of September, and the reason that that date is very significant is because that is the anniversary of Rise of Kingdoms. Okay, the end of September is often when we see the anniversary of Rise of Kingdoms, and I think this is going to actually matter quite a bit. Now, what could happen is, you know, we get the 70-day cycle as we expect, and then when the anniversary comes around, there's an event that you can unlock that commander, right? So for example, with Liu Che, I think he was the 5-year anniversary or 6-year anniversary, something like that, and you know, he came around at that time and you were able to unlock him for free, right? Last year, I think it was like Pepin and whatever the other guy's name is, Casimir, right? And then the year before that, I don't remember exactly, but my point is the timing here could actually line up really well for the anniversary, and I do think that the developers like to have something very exciting for the anniversary of Rise of Kingdoms, right? So they may actually just sort of force this window just to time it up to have something really cool to release for the anniversary. So I think this is much more likely than the 56-day cycle, but I think equally as likely is the standard 70-day cycle, and then everyone gets the commander and everyone gets excited, and then 2 weeks later or whatever, we have the anniversary of Rise of Kingdoms, and then everyone's able to get their hands on that commander for free if they didn't get them for the original release, right? So that's my expectation here. Here's another thing that I'll mention, and this sort of might bleed into, you know, the question of who are these commanders going to be, right? I actually have no idea who, like, what is the identity, what is the historical figure that will be in these spots here. I have no idea, right? In the past, I've asked for Vlad the Impaler, I've asked for Hattori Hanzo, I've asked for Oda Nobunaga, which when I went to Japan back in May, I actually saw where Oda Nobunaga, his like sort of I don't think it was a shrine, but it was more so like dedicated to him. Very cool stuff, right? It was actually amazing to be there. Very nice. So there's all the usual suspects that I could sort of sit here and rally off and say like, hey, yeah, I want these commanders to come into the game. But I actually think most likely one of these commanders, probably the open field commander, I suspect will be a Chinese general. And the reason that I suspect that is because if we look back at the recent cavalry releases, there actually hasn't been a notable Chinese figure that has landed for the cavalry meta in quite a while. Actually, Hua was the last time that cavalry players saw a legendary Chinese general. And if you look at all of the commanders in Rise of Kingdoms, China, or in ancient China, is the most common civilization to get new commanders, right? Now I suspect it's because Rise of Kingdoms is a game developed in China, and so they have the most knowledge of ancient China, right? I mean, of course, and also to bring that culture to the world is really, really cool. And so when the community says like, hey, there's a lot of Chinese commanders in the game, it's like, okay, well, yeah, duh, obviously, right? And I think that that matters when we look at the release of commanders here. It's just, it feels like a really long time since cavalry got a Chinese general, right? In fact, July of 2023 was when Hua came out, so quite literally 3 years ago was the last time that cavalry got a really cool Chinese commander. Okay, and then we saw, of course, infantry got Liu Che, and they got Bai Qi, and they got Sun Tzu, right? Archers got Emperor Qin just last year, 1 year ago, basically. All that to say, it's been a while. It's been a while since cavalry commanders have seen a new Chinese general, and I think it would line up really well here if we're talking about the anniversary of Rise of Kingdoms, right? I mean, like, doesn't that I mean, look at the icon, look at the app icon. It's Cao Cao, right? Because he's a super famous Chinese general, and he happens to be cavalry, by the way. Okay, so I think, you know, this would be the time if cavalry was going to have a really powerful commander land in the game, and it's going to line up with the anniversary of the game, and they haven't seen a Chinese general in 3 years. I think the stars are kind of aligning here, in my opinion, right? That's just my best guess. Now, who it's going to be, I have no idea. I don't want to embarrass myself and pretend like I know these famous, you know, generals from ancient China. Like I'm not that familiar. Okay, I know Sun Tzu had a somewhat famous student, I believe, who was also a military strategist or general or something like that. I also think, and I've gone on record in the past, I've said that a Lubu Prime is like super overdue. Lubu is in Rise of Kingdoms, but he's kind of locked behind an event that we're never going to get again, and he's garbage, right? And that just feels bad for Lubu. Like he's so prominent in other games that explores ancient China, so like a Lubu Prime would just be like, okay, now he's actually relevant. That would be cool, right? So Lubu Prime would be cool, but beyond that, I'm sure there's plenty of other Chinese generals that are significant that I just don't know about that could find themselves in one of these slots here. Okay, so that's my expectation. Also, Zhang Yu Prime would be really cool. I don't know, like he was just so cool in the meta for so long. As Zhang Yu Prime would be awesome, but I think again, there's like so many other commanders that they could choose from. I'd rather them not go the prime route, but it is worth noting that cavalry hasn't seen a prime commander since the middle of 2024, so it's been 2 years since cavalry got a prime commander, and I think it's overdue. So we could see a prime commander here. I think that would make a lot of sense. The 11th generation of commanders has one prime, with that being Sun Tzu. Okay, and then the 10th generation of commanders has no prime commanders at all, right? So we're kind of overdue for a new prime commander on top of all of that as well. So that's my 2 cents here. Lubu Prime would be awesome. I would love that, but yeah, that's kind of how I'm feeling when it comes to the field viability of these commanders, right? I think the rally commander is unlikely to be field viable. I don't think that cavalry really needs him to be field viable, because David is already field viable to an extent, and we've got Hector, and we've got Vercingetorix. So there's lots of field viable secondaries for cavalry when we think about a 2 or 3 lineup, to the point where I don't think this needs to be field viable. Subutai certainly was not, and historically we haven't seen the rally. I guess Justinian was, right? So I mean, maybe he could be. Okay, maybe he could be. We'll have to wait and see. I will say that cavalry rally commanders haven't been AoE since Zhang Yu, right? And that was in the early parts of 2021, so 5 years ago. I don't expect this rally commander to be AoE, quite frankly. That just doesn't seem like what cavalry do in the rally meta, right? if we want an AoE commander, it's usually archers, and if not archers, maybe it's infantry lately. But yeah, so I guess that argument goes both ways, right? We haven't seen one since 2021. We're overdue for an AoE cavalry commander, right? That's totally another way you could look at that, especially with everything I just said. You know, we haven't seen a prime, we haven't seen a Chinese general in a while, and they haven't had an AoE rally commander in a while. Zhang Yu prime confirmed, right? Maybe, right? Maybe, I don't know, but that would be cool. But again, at the same time, it's like, do we need that for cav rallies? Maybe, right? Maybe. I'm not really sure. If I were to guess, I would say it's going to be single target damage for the rally commander. It is what it is. If we think about what is the damage factor going to look like, well, we could just look at some of the more recent rally garrison commanders from the 10th and 11th generation. Okay, so if we look at Subutai, he dealt about 3,000 damage with his single target damage skill. Okay, if we look at somebody like Tokugawa, it was 2,400, but he's garrison. Shapur was 3,200, which is really pushing it there in terms of damage output. Hector is a field commander, but also garrison, so I'll kind of consider him. He's 2,800. David is 2,800, but he's an AoE commander, right? So that's a lot of damage there. Same thing with Ivar, 2,500, but he's AoE, and he has some rage on the active skill there. Hayam is 2,500 to one target. So we're seeing sort of a range between 2,500 to 3,200 on the high end. And again, as I always say here in these videos, the more the active skill does, the lower the damage factor is going to be, right? If it's just vanilla damage, they're going to push it through the roof like they do with somebody like Shapur, for example, right? 3,200 with a single skill shot is kind of crazy. But if it's AoE and it does other things, then it's like, okay, maybe it's 2,800. Okay, so again, keep that expectation. I think 2,500 is a little low right now, although I know we just saw it with Hayam, so I don't really know what's going on there. But I don't know, I'm feeling like we're entering a whole new generation. This is the 12th generation. I think that they might want to set the stage for what's coming rather than looking back and fit it into everything from the last 2 years. It's kind of has to do a little bit of both, right? That's the nature of a live service game. So I would expect it, you know, 2,500 on the super low end if it's going to be like AoE and have an effect and all this other stuff. More than likely though, I would say it's probably 2,800 to 3,200. It seems like they're trying not to push the damage like way too high, right? I mean, we had a 5 target 2,500 damage factor rally commander all the way back in the beginning of 2024, right? So it's like we've kind of been in that range for a while now, so I do expect them to push the lower end of that range a little bit higher. I know again, Hayama is kind of the exception here. I don't know what's causing his damage factor to be so low. It could simply just be the fact that he's also got a debuff there and he's got tons of damage factor on the 4th skill, but frankly I have not been keeping up with the archer garrison meta myself, so I can't say for certain why his damage factor is so low. But yeah, that's kind of how I'm feeling here. I think we're gonna see it's a 1 target, and by the way, it's gonna be combo damage almost guaranteed, right? So this number is gonna be cut in half, and then it's gonna deal 2 of them in a single turn, or it could do 3 combos, and you know, it's a 1,000 damage factor each. We'll have to actually wait and see how that's gonna work. When it comes to the field commander, this is where things get really confusing, right? I think a lot of people are really expecting an AoE commander here because they feel like cavalry really need it, and that is true. I'm not going to debate that, right? But when we look at the current field meta, we have to ask ourselves some important questions about how the developers are sort of orienting the field meta to begin with, right? So when we look at archers, for example, we're seeing lots of AoE damage, right? We have Emperor Qin is AoE on every turn. We have YSG or Zhuge who's circular AoE, and then we have most people right now are using Hermann Prime with Alp Arslan, right? And Hermann Prime is an AoE commander. Alp Arslan is notably not AoE. Okay, so in that scenario, in a 2 archer lineup, you're seeing 3 AoE commanders and 1 single target. If we look at infantry, we've got Sun Tzu Prime, who is technically AoE, right? We've got Bai Chi, we've got Liu Che, and we've got William Wallace. Okay, so that's 4 commanders, 3 of which are AoE, 1 of them which is not. All right, so then we look at cavalry, and we have who's the current meta for cavalry, right? We have King Arthur, we have Achilles, we have Genghis Khan, and then we have, you know, basically filler, whether it's Hector or it's Philip or whoever you're using there, Vercingetorix perhaps later this week, and that's it. Okay, so we've already got our single target damage commander. King Arthur and Achilles are AoE commanders, so if we're going to fit the same mold that we've been seeing where it's a 2 army lineup has 3 AoE and 1 single target, then yeah, this should be an AoE commander. Now is that a rule? Absolutely not, right? Frankly, it is not a rule at all, and in any case, I think one of the things that, you know, people really want Cav to have AoE, but if you look at the single best AoE cavalry commander pairing right now, if you're going all AoE, it's obviously King Arthur with Achilles. That's your only choice, really. So when we look at that march, you know, do we look at that and say that's the best cavalry march in the game? It's like, well, if your field presence is dominant, then yes, for sure, right? If you are fighting up against an enemy that is putting up a good fight or is overpowering you, then that march is almost certainly not what you want to use, right? You almost definitely want to use your Genghis Khan with Achilles, right? So in that scenario, it's like, well, hang on, right? Like just because it's double AoE doesn't mean it's the de facto best thing to do anymore, right? That used to be the case. You would always just only do double AoE and you always performed better that way. In this case, in this current meta, the value, there's actually a lot of value in tanky commanders, right? And I think, you know, the community is still kind of stuck in that mindset of like only ever do double AoE, right? And you know, if we have a tanky AoE commander, then that would be the answer, right? Like that would be what we would want here. So, you know, I would say, would an AoE commander here be great? Absolutely. But I would almost want them to be more tanky than damage focused, right? You know, have the damage fine, make it 3 target, make it on the lower end, but then buff their kit with a bunch of tankiness, right? That's really what I would want to see, because again, we're looking at a commander that's probably going to be behind King Arthur, you know what I mean? And so King Arthur is very fragile. He does a lot of damage. He even gives you 30% combo damage on top of that. So he does the amplification for you as well. So he's kind of doing everything except tankiness. And so he just needs a really tanky commander with him that also deals damage, right? And that's the problem that we see with Philip, for example. His damage output's very, very low. It's so low, and he's glass cannon. So, you know, you're kind of taking your high damage King Arthur and kind of fitting him into more of a supportive mold, and it like works, but it doesn't feel good, right? Lots of bad reports of that. I've actually been seeing a lot of you guys telling me the same thing, like, yeah, King Arthur with Philip is just not, it's just the fastest way to fill your hospital in 2026. So even myself, I stopped using it. It's just not worth it. There's no reason to run that, right? Now Hector solves that problem, but Hector is a single target damage commander who has lots of long cooldowns, and like he's good for now, right? But the thing that would be better than Hector would be an AoE commander, right? That has a similar amount of tankiness. Okay, so that's kind of how I'm feeling about this. Does it have to be AoE? No, I think more than AoE, it needs to be a little bit tanky. Really, that's what I think it has to have. But AoE would be nice, right? It would push it up a notch in terms of meta viability there. I don't think we need another Genghis Khan, right? Which is like super tanky single target. I think we need a decently tanky AoE, right? Like really just middle of the line damage output, middle of the line tankiness. That's what we want to see, in my opinion, for an Arthur secondary. That would be the perfect sweet spot there. Not too power crept in the damage direction, not too power crept in the tanky direction, like Genghis Khan, for example, right in the middle. And I think that would be the best thing for cavalry right now. Now, the pushback that I'll probably get there is like, look, cavalry never got their Emperor Qin. They never got their Sun Tzu Prime, right? And that is true. And I think that if we look actually, in fact, at Sun Tzu Prime as a great example here, I think if cavalry got their Sun Tzu Prime for this release, that would be great. Do they need an Emperor Qin? No, I don't think they need an Emperor Qin. Archers needed Emperor Qin when he came out. Like archers were down bad, and it was so bad that they had to change the whole meta to make archers viable again, basically. And that's why Emperor Qin is the way he is. I think cavalry are more in the position of needing a Sun Tzu Prime than an Emperor Qin, and Sun Tzu Prime would kind of fit the mold with which I'm talking about here, where he is AoE but not exactly, right? And I think that would be kind of the sweet spot for cavalry if they did, very similar to Sun Tzu Prime, a big single target hit with a little bit of extra true damage AoE on top of that to just really flesh out the damage there, and not power creep it to insane levels by having it, you know, affected by the 30% combo damage on King Arthur, right? I mean, it would still affect it, but indirectly, not directly affecting the true damage. You get my point. But on top of that, Sun Tzu Prime is on his own quite tanky, right? He's pretty good in the tanky department as well, and I think that would actually be perfect for cavalry. But I think the reason that Cav players really want their Emperor Qin moment is because they feel like Cav have been neglected for a while, right? And I feel that too, right? I would, you know, before I invested in Alp Arslan, I ran 2 infantry, 2 cavalry, 1 archer, right? That was my lineup. And so I am more invested in cavalry than I am in archers, and so I would love for them to get a super broken commander. It would benefit me personally, right? But here's why I don't think that cavalry is going to have their Emperor Qin moment just yet. I think it will come in in due time, but I think we're gonna have to wait a little while longer, right? And the reason for that is because if you zoom out and you look at the Rise of Kingdoms field meta as a whole, okay, cavalry were kind of the de facto field meta ever since Saladin landed in the game, all the way up until about the time Liu Che came around. And the reason that Liu Che was so significant is because the Liu Che CPO combo was so good, right? Like that was just the best open field commander pair, almost guaranteed. The Zhuge Liang pair kind of rivaled it, but at that time we were running Boudica and she just was like single target, so whatever. It wasn't until Hermann Prime came that we saw another double AoE pairing that really mattered, right? So my point is, from the time that Saladin landed in the game, and certainly by the time Attila landed in the game, all the way up through the middle or end of 2023, cavalry were the field meta, right? A lot of people forget this because it's been such a long time, and also because a lot of you guys weren't even playing back then, but I was there. I remember everyone kind of was like, yeah, cav is the way to go if you want to be meta in the open field. And I think that sort of sentiment has never really left the community. I think that that has stayed sort of in the back of people's mind for the longest time, like, hey, what the hell, cavalry are supposed to dominate the open field, and they haven't in a while, right? Again, if we use that Liu Che release as sort of the tipping point for cavalry in the field meta, because remember what they got next was Belisarius Prime, right? And so that was kind of like the downfall of cavalry, was when other troop types started to become relevant in the field with the introduction of Liu Che and Hermann Prime and Zhuge Liang, right? So since then, cavalry haven't really been as dominant as they were prior, right? But if you look at that, right, like let's say from early to mid 2019 all the way through like mid to end of 2023, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, so for like 4 years cavs were pretty dominant in the open field, and it's only since then that that's changed. So it's been about 2.5 years since that meta shifted, right? So it's still technically true that for a majority of Rise of Kingdoms history, cavs were the best in the open field, right? Even though the last 2.5 years have been rough for cavs, it's still been the case that a majority of the time they were meta, right? And so it is only fair, I mean, let's just be real here, it's only fair that other troop types get their time in the spotlight, right? And I think that with the introduction of Sun Tzu Prime and with the introduction of Emperor Qin, for sure, that's been the developers' way of kind of forcing there to be more diversity in the open field and say like, hey, look, everyone gets the time in the spotlight. Cavs are taking a back seat for now. The other troop types are shining, and in particular, infantry has been dominant the last 2.5 years, right? Now, that being said, I wouldn't be surprised if infantry's time was, you know, it's peaking right now, I would say, with Sun Tzu Prime, and then the next infantry release I suspect will be a little bit lukewarm, but it could be time for the archers to be dominant, right? Emperor Qin is already insane, but at the same time, Shajar was not very good. Alp Arslan is more supportive, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if the developers sort of flipped the meta from infantry to archers now and not back to cavalry, right? Because it's kind of archers time. Now, again, all of this is sort of loosely defined, right? There's no like best, oh, this is definitely the best troop type for the field, and this is definitely the second best. It varies, right? Especially because right now, I think infantry are still the best troop type in the field, but the best single army is clearly archers, right? I mean, like, what are we talking about? It's obviously Emperor Qin. There's a little bit of variation there depending on how you're defining the field meta. Single best march, it's archers. Best 2 army lineup, best 3 army lineup, I would say it's infantry right now. My point is, I'm not surprised that they've strayed away from cavalry for so long, because cavalry already had their time, right? If that makes sense. So will this release bring cavs back to the meta? Hopefully, right? But do cavalry need to be the best field meta out there forever? No, still no, right? I think we still have at least another year before we say, okay, now cavalry really have been in the dirt for a while. They definitely need something good, right? So I think the whole point of this section of the video is to say that I think the downfall of cavalry is grossly exaggerated, even though I agree they need something good. Does that make sense? Those things are not mutually exclusive. I think they're still fine, but they've had their time in the spotlight for so long, and you know, maybe my perception is a little bit skewed because I've been here for so long, but I remember cavalry being good forever. Okay, so it's like, I'm not surprised that they're taking a back burner still, because their reign was like 4 years. Okay, so that's kind of how I'm feeling about that. So all of that to say, do they need an Emperor Qin commander here? No. Do they need a Sun Tzu Prime commander here? Maybe, right? Maybe, because Achilles just was not it. He's great for damage output, but he was a little bit too squishy. So do they need their Sun Tzu Prime? I think so, but again, I would not be surprised if it was just if it fell just a little bit short of that. And even if it does, right, like even if they don't get their Sun Tzu Prime, even if they don't get their Emperor Qin, if this commander is a little little bit tanky with some AoE, I think cavalry will definitely have a better 2-army lineup than archers, no question, right? So again, that's kind of where I'm feeling like, you know, they don't need something to blow your mind in order to become competitive in the 2-army lineup space because of how rough archers have it with that second army. So I'm kind of trying to temper your expectations a little bit here. I think this commander will be strong. I think the damage output will be good. I think the tankiness should be good. Really, that's what Cavs need, but I'm not expecting them to become the best in the field. Okay, I don't think that's a reasonable expectation to have going into this. When you look at the broader open field meta, I don't think that it needs to happen, right? I don't think Cavs are in such a bad spot that they need that. So that's how I'm feeling. When it comes to the damage output, okay, do I think it'll be single target? I think it could be, right? If it's single target, I think we definitely need at least a 3,200 damage factor, right? I mean, again, if it's gonna be like, what are we talking about? We already have Gangnam Chan doing 3,000. Okay, so like it's got to be more than that, really. Another Gangnam Chan would be really boring. Okay, so it has to be more than that, in my opinion. I don't think it needs to be supportive. I think Vercingetorix fills that role, so there's no reason to make it supportive. And then on top of that, we have Hector or Philip if you want even more support, and people are even still running William, which is a 2020 commander. Okay, so I don't think that there's any expectation for this to be more of a supportive commander. I think it's probably going to be a mid-tier tanky, mid-tier damage, or high-tier damage. I think those are more likely. 3,200 3 target would be interesting, or a 3,000 3 target would be really interesting as well. I would even take a 2,800 3 target like David, right? That would be really cool. I would like that a lot. I don't think it'll be 5 target. I think that, I mean, really, we don't see cavalry get 5 target often. Now, I said that with infantry, and then we got Liu Che, and then we got Bai Chi right after, right? And so, like, you know, it totally could happen. They could absolutely do that. There's no question there. Now that the floodgates are open for 5 target cavalry, there's no saying they won't do it again. I just think if you look at the history of cavalry, it's more likely to be 3 target than it is 5 target. So if it's going to be a 3 target AoE, again, I think we're looking at something like probably 2,700 to 3,000. I would be kind of surprised if it went higher than that for a 3 target AoE, especially because I'm hoping this to be a little bit more of a tanky commander. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. I think the sweet spot would be something like 2,900 3 target AoE, but give them a lot of defense and health, make it combo damage, and then you're good to go. I think that would be kind of the best you can expect for cavalry here. Of course, there is the chance that it is something totally game breaking and I'm just completely wrong here, but I don't think that the developers need or want to do that. But anyway, guys, that's gonna do it for this video. Those are kind of all of my thoughts on what I expect the upcoming cavalry to be, what I'm kind of thinking, what I'm predicting, and what I think the devs think regarding the field meta. I could be completely wrong. Like I said, my track record is probably about 50-50, so you guys can let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you think cavalry really needs something strong, or do you think that they're actually in a pretty good spot right now, especially with Hector and Vercingetorix, and they kind of just need like another Gangnam Chan? Let me know in the comment section below, and while you're down there, drop a thumbs up on the video. It really does help out the channel a ton, and double check to see if you're subscribed to the channel. You might think you are because you watch my videos all the time, but you're actually not. With that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Peace.